All right, so for our upcoming session for the aquatic plant control session, we have for our first speaker is Kara Slowinski, who is a project manager and aquatic biologist in the Northeast with Solitude Lake Management. Kara's experience has focused primarily on development and implementation of regulated multi-stakeholder aquatic plant management programs at large water bodies throughout New England and New York. She received her bachelor's degree in marine biology and environmental science from Roger Williams University. Kara will be presenting a talk on ProcellaCor experience in the Northeast after 2 to 3 seasons. So take it away, Kara.
Thanks, Emily. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you and see your slides.
Cool. Thank you. So as Emily mentioned, I'm going to run through our ProcellaCor experience in the Northeast after the last 2 to 3 seasons. Right now, that number varies as states have registered ProcellaCor at different points through its existence. So quick overview of what we are going to run through today. So just kind of some experience highlights from our treatments throughout New England as well as New York. And kind of the lessons learned that we have gotten from those treatments, as well as potential future lessons that we hope we can gain. So a quick state overview. We have touched everything from Maine to New York at least once. And all of those sites have varied both target species wise and obviously configuration and that sort of thing. So as you can see, New Hampshire really takes the cake. A lot of credit to Amy for really supporting the ProcellaCor movement when it kind of came out. So we've done 60 treatments to date in New Hampshire for primarily variable water milfoil, but throughout New England, we've done Eurasian variable as well as some hybrid sites in Vermont. So starting with Maine, we have Kabasi Lake up in Winthrop. It's about 1,400 acres. This project, as well as the next one, were done in coordination with John McFedrin of Maine DEP. And so in 2019, approximately the end of July, we treated a 4-acre site at the Lakeside Lodge and Marina for Eurasian water milfoil. So as you can see on the map, it was a pretty heavily used area with all of those docks. Those 2 yellow circles are herbicide residue sample sites. And so this treatment was done using a aluminum skiff as well as a backpack sprayer while walking up and down the docks. So this next site, Annabessacook Lake, also in the Winthrop area, about 5,500 acres, was actually treated for variable water milfoil this past August. So a pretty larger scale treatment, approximately 91 acres, but scattered throughout 14 different treatment areas. And those areas themselves ranged from about 1/4 of an acre up to about 41 acres. So pretty sizable and pretty small, so definitely varying configurations. John was kind enough to share this post-treatment survey video with us. And so certainly as the video plays, you can see the dead milfoil stems that are still kind of leaning over within the water column, but as well as the native plant growth, as well as some algae that are still present. So there's some lilies there, and so those did get a little bit banged up as anticipated for the treatment area. So big thanks to John for sharing that video for everybody to see. And so as I mentioned, for New Hampshire, we had a lot of different sites to choose from. And so I chose to focus on one that we actually had some challenges with because I felt it was pretty interesting. So Back Bay is an area of Winnipesaukee in Wolfboro. And so the treatment area was about 33 acres, and that's about the size of the whole entire cove as well. So as you can see, that pink area was our treatment area, and that little finger cove to the west side of it is actually called Frog Pond. And so because of some concerns about post-treatment water use restrictions, the treatment was scheduled for September of 2018, and that entire area was treated. So those blue lines that you can see were the actual treatment tracks. And so unfortunately in 2019, we did see some milfoil regrowth throughout some of those areas that were treated. And so in 2020, in June, we proceeded with another treatment. It's a little bit smaller this time, only about 25 acres. And really, those treatment lines are much more condensed than the first time, and a smaller separate boat was actually used for that frog pond portion, so that a spray pump on board the boat as well as a backpack could be used to apply the product. So for Massachusetts, we treated Otis Reservoir, which is out in the Berkshires. It's about 1,100 acres, pretty long, has some smaller coves throughout it. And so in 2019, we actually treated this northern cove, highlighted with that orange box. It's about a 10-acre cove here, shown here. Pretty high use area, has a lot of boat traffic, a lot of docks, a lot of boats that are moored out there, and is kind of rocky in some areas, which you can kind of see on that satellite image. And so that entire cove was treated. We saw great success in 2019, and during survey efforts in 2020, there was no milfoil observed through that area. So moving forward to 2020, there was actually a smaller area kind of along the middle southwestern shoreline that had a spot of Eurasian milfoil growing. So it's along this kind of cove here behind this island, as highlighted by the orange box. And basically there was just some Eurasian growing, some scattered stems, but they were probably in about 6 to 8 feet of water. That is a state boat ramp right next to it that you can see, that gray area. There's a campground in the state forest and everything. So certainly another higher use area with some concerns for spreading. Moving forward to Connecticut, Bashan Lake in East Haddam is about 273 acres. So in 2018, we worked with Greg Bugbee, and as you can see from his map, the areas in green or shaded green there were our treatment areas for 2018. So it was definitely a later treatment, early October, and it was about 13 acres scattered over 8 different areas. But as you can kind of see, there's 3 of them that are pretty offshore, subject to a lot of dilution and in some deeper waters. That one along the southwestern shoreline was approaching the 20-foot contour. So, we tackled those for Greg and saw pretty good success, because this year, or 2020, we treated again for Greg and the group there at Bashan, and this was this year's map. So as you can see, if I go back and forth between the 18 map and the 20, those 3 offshore areas did not need to be retreated, which was really important, knowing that they had been a challenging spot to manage in general. So big success there for sure. This year's or 2020's areas were pretty small, 6 areas, and it was really only like 5 or so acres. Moving on to another water body in Connecticut, Woodridge Lake in Goshen. It's about 388 acres. And this year they decided to proceed with treating their Eurasian water milfoil. So in late August, about 115 acres were treated. So you can not only see on that map the treatment area outline, but as well as the individual milfoil points that were taken about 11 days before treatment. So, pretty heavily residential shoreline development. The boat ramp and marina area are in the southeastern corner of the lake, so that southern area A. And this map now shows the past 3 seasons of the point survey data for Eurasian water milfoil. So the black dots show no milfoil present, green show where milfoil is dominant, or green show where it's present, and red show where it's dominant. So 18, 19, and 20. As you can see, 18, kind of scattered growth. 19, definitely a pretty significant increase. And this year in 2020, after the ProcellaCor treatment, there was absolutely none found at any of those survey points, which I think is pretty impactful, knowing that no part of the western shoreline was treated, and there was still no milfoil observed over there. Moving on to New York, some of you may have seen Dr. Mark Heilman present previously at various conferences on Snyder's Lake in North Greenbush, but it was the first ProcellaCor treatment in the state of New York. So June of 2019, the 13th, that day was a pretty rainy day and not exactly pleasant by any means, but treated about 27 acres, that orange area you can see on the map. It extended about 200 feet from the shoreline, and we stopped it about 500 feet from the outlet to comply with downstream modeling for New York. The blue dots that you can see are the fall of 2018 milfoil points from the survey efforts, whereas the yellow points show no milfoil at the survey points. So all around a big success. I was there later in 2019 with some of the CPRO staff, and we did not see any milfoil stems. And as far as we know, things are still great out there. More recently, in 2020, our New York staff treated Minerva Lake up in the Adirondack Park. It's about 80 acres. So for those of you familiar with the Adirondack Park, herbicide treatment for Eurasian water milfoil is not a common activity. Most times they just spend their efforts on DASH services. And so again, the blue dots show where the milfoil was present in fall of 2019. As well as the red dot, and yellow shows no presence and is definitely the deeper areas of Minerva. So as a result of that, we scheduled treatment for June 5th, and it was a perfect day. Absolutely beautiful out there and no breeze and ideal for sure. So the treatment area was about 41 acres, and shown in purple here, really those higher use areas and higher density milfoil areas. This picture is care of Glenn Sullivan himself. He spent a lot of time up at Minerva for this treatment, and this was a stem of milfoil that he found shortly after the treatment effort. I have no post-season 2020 report map to show anyone, as there was no milfoil observed at any of the survey points. Moving on to Vermont. These are a little bit more exciting for me personally, as I've been more involved. So Lake Morey is in Fairleigh, Vermont. It's about 550 acres. And so at the end of 2018, they saw a pretty significant uptick for what they're used to in their milfoil frequency of occurrence and percent cover. They hadn't treated for a couple of years, so they went into 2019, anticipating ProcellaCor's registration in Vermont, and we're excited to try it. So we were out there June 11th. We treated 41 acres as shown in black on this map, and covered a significant amount of the shoreline for Morey. The littoral zone drops off pretty quickly. As you can see, it's relatively narrow by that dotted line, and that wider northern treatment area is where their legacy milfoil has been a challenge. So, fast forward the end of 2019, and we saw exactly what we wanted to see in terms of survey point data, but there was one slight outlier. We were there in July, which we didn't see any milfoil post-treatment, but then when we were there in September, which is this middle map, there were about a dozen plants that we observed. They were pretty small and definitely newer growth. Fast forward to the end of this year, and that growth expanded much more than we expected it to this year. And so that's what the right-hand map is. So they are going into 2021 planning for another application. This was the growth in that northern area this past September. Just to give everybody a true visual, I apologize, it's a little fuzzy because it's through my polarized lenses, but the milfoil is definitely there and noticeable. Moving on to Lake Hortonia on the other side of Vermont. It's about 500 acres, and Hortonia has had not only Eurasian but hybrid water milfoil for about almost the last 10 years. The milfoil prior to that as well, but that's when the hybrid was identified. So in 2019, we treated the middle of June. We treated about 44 acres, as shown in black on that map. And we certainly had some potential concerns going into that. The western basin of Hortonia is pretty shallow, whereas the eastern basin is pretty deep. And that middle treatment area was subject to probably more flow than we could have anticipated. But we weren't really sure what was going to happen. Again, another perfect treatment day. It was beautiful. And Darren Freshwater Institute actually does their survey efforts in the fall. So Larry Eichler and his staff are responsible for these maps. And so as you can see from 2018 to 2019, those milfoil abundances absolutely disappeared, which was exciting because that certainly decreased more than just in areas that we treated. So fast forward to 2020, we treated 2 other areas in Hortonia that had other growth. So about 22.5 acres, again, the middle of June. And, once again, Larry's map from comparing 19 to 20 shows a pretty good decrease in the treatment areas. But as you'll see, kind of in the northeastern areas on the map, the red and orange dots are kind of more appearing over there. And that's where we did renovate in 2018, but they get on average about a year and a half post-treatment year of control from Renovate because of their hybrid population. Last but not least, in terms of highlighting, I think probably the most interesting was Lake Pineo in Quechee, Vermont. So it's about 43 acres, and this 2020 marked their first treatment ever. It was a long-awaited process. It's been through the permitting process for quite some time now. That map there shows, it's a completely privately owned pond at the Quechee Club, for those of you familiar with that area. Surrounded by a golf course. And so milfoil was found in there and is assumed to be introduced in 2012 after Hurricane Irene flooded it. And so this was their survey point milfoil density in 2019. So pretty much every single survey point, with the exception of a couple, had milfoil present. So we knew we were in it for the long haul here. And so fast forward to this June, we did not have a permit in hand yet, but this is what conditions looked like. And so it was really interesting, because when I was there this day, I certainly was not expecting, stems and flowers mid-June, certainly a little bit too early for Vermont. But from what I understand, the plants never fell the previous winter. So they were pretty high within the water column for a majority of the cold water months. And, they were ready. So this was the day of treatment, as seen from the boat. Not a great look by any means. So moving forward, September 8th is when we treated. And so these are some photos. I know it's probably hard to see on everybody's screens. It's not up on a projector and they're relatively small to begin with, but you can definitely see the milfoil was still topped out, hadn't gone anywhere by the time we were treating. A couple weeks later, I was there on the 22nd, and this was the conditions then. Some of it had fallen, some of it had not, kind of mixed bag depending on where you were in the treatment areas. So this is actually what was happening with the plants that day that I was there on the 22nd. The leaflets were just peeling right off, and the stems were just immediately snapping at all of the nodes. So definitely some impact, although the plants were still green and not that potential black color that most people may have experienced post ProcellaCor. So again, these are the September 8th photos from the day of treatment. And these were the October 22nd photos from when we were there for the post-treatment survey. So, the plants had finally fallen, certainly something we expected to go a little bit slower because of the seasonal timing, but it was a significant improvement. So, again, those June photos and then the same vantage point from October. So pretty meaningful. So really, what have we learned here? I think a lot of things, for sure. I think first and foremost, from not only potentially Back Bay, but Lake Morey as well, that treatment timing is probably needs to be dialed in a little bit more than we probably anticipated, based on previous use assumptions and patterns from other herbicides. You really need to think about, is there enough active plant growth, or has enough plant growth really germinated at this point? In addition to that, how your treatment areas are configured. I think that, yes, we've always kept in mind dilution and that sort of thing, but because ProcellaCor has such a short contact time, I think it's probably more crucial than it was before. Hand in hand with that goes dosing for your target species. I've certainly seen some mixed results a little bit on the hybrid water milfoil in Vermont because of some dosing stuff. And then your average depth, that middle picture that you're looking at right now with ProcellaCor going into the water and those milfoil stems is at Lake St. Catherine in Vermont. And that area is probably about 10 to 15 feet deep. So you really need to make sure that your application methods are appropriate and that you're using good drop hoses that are really getting the product down onto those plants and it isn't just sitting on the surface. So, what can we still potentially learn from all of this? I think, as I said before, that treatment timing, but in addition to that, the dosing, are we able to still go in at somewhat of an early-ish time and maybe tweak our dosing a little bit? The treatment area sizing, I think that part goes both ways as well. Like, can you not only go the small end of things and see what your success is, because certainly the efficacy there could be much more financially feasible for groups as opposed to sending in divers or putting down bottom barriers. But on the large scale side of things too, you know, it's like really how can we maximize what we're doing in some areas? We certainly have large water bodies throughout the Northeast that could appreciate that. Species susceptibility, you know, not only the milfoil species, but the natives as well, the floating leaf species, as well as coontail. You know, it's a mixed bag on what we've seen. And I think that, you know, based on their proximity to the treatment area and the dosing, I think, you know, that remains to be seen as to, you know, what kind of thresholds we have to work with. And then in addition to that, all of us can probably pay more attention to sites that we have, not only with ProcellaCor, but any herbicide we're using, to sites that require some sort of follow-up treatment. Like there's got to be some sort of defining or similarity between all of them that we can identify and, you know, move forward individually, as a group, whatever, to say, okay, hey, well, you know, I learned this from this treatment, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that we all still have plenty to learn, and certainly open to any questions that anybody may have. But big thanks to everybody who was involved with all those projects that I mentioned. Certainly wouldn't be where we are today without any of us.